The milkshake hit Jake Morrison's back with a wet splat, the cold vanilla shake soaking through his orange prison jumpsuit. Laughter erupted through Blackwater Correctional Facility's cafeteria, loud, cruel, echoing off concrete walls. Tank Rodriguez stood behind him, surrounded by his crew, waiting for the new fish to snap. But Jake didn't move. He just stared at the white puddle dripping from his sleeve, then slowly lifted his eyes. Behind those calm ice-blue irises wasn't fear. It was calculation. Pure, cold calculation. Because this wasn't the first time someone had tried to humiliate him, and the last man who did it never walked again. If you're hooked already, smash that subscribe button for Behind Bars Tales. You won't want to miss what happens when a decorated Navy SEAL finally fights back. Jake Morrison looked like any other middle-aged inmate shuffling through Blackwater's steel doors that Tuesday morning. Gray haircut, military short, shoulders slightly stooped. Weathered hands that moved with careful economy. The intake officer barely glanced up from his paperwork. Another white-collar criminal, probably fraud or tax evasion. Nothing that would cause waves. But if that officer had looked closer, really studied the man standing before him, he might have noticed something different. The way Jake's eyes swept the room in calculated arcs, cataloging exits and threats. The way his breathing remained perfectly controlled despite being surrounded by concrete and steel. The subtle readiness in his posture that spoke of years spent in places where a split second meant life or death. Jake Morrison wasn't just another white-collar criminal. He was a retired Navy SEAL with 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, and enough classified missions to fill a library. At 47, he'd served his country with distinction before building a successful security consulting business. Now he was prisoner, #783 sentenced to 18 months for financial crimes after his business partner embezzled funds and disappeared, leaving Jake holding the bag. The cell block Jake was assigned to had its own brutal hierarchy, and everyone knew who sat at the top. Vincent Tank Rodriguez was a mountain of a man, 6'6", 300 pounds of muscle and scar tissue. He'd ruled Cell Block C for 5 years through systematic violence and psychological warfare. His crew moved through the prison like sharks through bloody water, and the guards had learned that maintaining order was easier when they let Tank handle discipline in his own savage way. Tank had earned his nickname during his 3rd year inside when he single-handedly demolished a rival gang's attempt to move into his territory. The fight left 2 men hospitalized, and Tank's reputation cemented in blood and broken bones. Since then, he decided who got protection and who became prey. His word was law. His enforcement was merciless. When Tank first laid eyes on Jake Morrison, he saw exactly what he wanted to see. An older white guy, probably pushing 50, with the soft look of someone who'd spent more time behind a desk than in a gym. Easy prey, a gift-wrapped opportunity to demonstrate his power. Jake's first night passed quietly. He made his bunk with military precision, organized his few belongings methodically, and sat reading until lights out. His cellmate, Danny, a nervous young man counting down his final months on a drug possession charge, couldn't help but notice something unusual. "You seem different from most guys who come through here," Danny whispered after lights out. "Most new arrivals either can't stop talking or they're too scared to say anything." Jake closed his book carefully. Talking about the past doesn't change it. Worrying about tomorrow doesn't improve it. All we have is right now. Danny didn't fully understand, but something in Jake's voice made him feel safer than he'd felt in months. The next morning, the cafeteria became Jake's introduction to prison politics. It was more than a place to eat. It was theater where hierarchies were displayed and power was demonstrated through 1,000 subtle interactions. Jake collected his breakfast tray without complaint. Watery eggs, stale toast, coffee that looked like it had been brewed the previous week. He scanned for an available seat. That's when Tank made his move. Well, well, well. Tank's voice boomed across the cafeteria, causing conversations to die. "Look what we got here, boys. Somebody's accountant got himself locked up with the real criminals." Jake continued walking toward the tables, his tray balanced, his expression unchanged. He'd encountered bullies in various forms throughout his military career. The uniforms changed, but the psychology remained remarkably consistent. They fed on fear, thrived on attention, and crumbled when faced with genuine indifference. "I'm talking to you, old man," Tank continued, louder now. "When somebody addresses you in here, you acknowledge them. That's basic respect." Jake stopped and turned calmly. "I heard you clearly. I was looking for a place to sit and eat my breakfast." The response wasn't what Tank expected. Most inmates either cowered immediately or tried to match his aggressive energy. This gray-haired man was doing neither. He stood there completely relaxed, speaking conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "Your breakfast can wait," Tank growled, stepping closer with his crew flanking him. "See that empty spot?" He pointed to a section near the garbage cans. "That's where new fish eat their first meal. It's tradition." Jake looked at the spot, then back at Tank. Around them, the cafeteria had gone silent. "I appreciate you explaining the traditions," Jake said quietly, "but I think I'll eat at a table like everyone else." The words hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Tank's face flushed red with anger and disbelief. In 5 years of ruling this block, no one had ever refused him so calmly, so completely without fear. Without warning, Tank knocked the tray from Jake's hands. It clattered to the floor, spilling eggs and coffee across the concrete. "Oops," Tank sneered. "Looks like you dropped your breakfast, Grandpa. Better clean that up before you get yourself in real trouble." Jake looked down at the mess, then slowly raised his eyes to meet Tank's gaze. For just a moment, something flickered behind those calm blue irises, something that made Tank's confident smirk falter. It was like looking into the eyes of a predator that had been pretending to be prey. Jake bent down, collected the pieces of his scattered breakfast, straightened up, and walked calmly to the serving line to request a replacement. The kitchen staff quickly prepared another tray without being asked. They'd seen this dance before. As Jake carried his new breakfast to an empty table and sat down to eat, conversations slowly resumed. But they were different now, hushed, careful. The power dynamic that had governed Cell Block C for 5 years had just been publicly challenged by a gray-haired man who looked like someone's grandfather. Tank and his crew retreated to their corner, planning their next move. What had just happened couldn't be allowed to stand. Disrespect had to be answered with violence. That was the only language that mattered. Jake ate his eggs methodically, appearing oblivious to the storm gathering around him. But his awareness was absolute. He could feel the hostile stares, hear the whispered conversations, sense the violence building like pressure in a steam pipe about to burst. Over the following days, Tank escalated. He gathered allies from every gang in the prison, Aryan Brotherhood, Mexican Mafia, even crews that usually wouldn't work together. He promised territory, commissary money, whatever it took. Word spread that Tank was assembling 20, maybe 30 serious players, all with nothing to lose. Danny whispered the warnings to Jake each night. They're saying Tank is bringing in professionals, lifers, killers. Jake lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling, and knew the confrontation was inevitable. He'd hoped his show of backbone would earn breathing room, but prison politics were more complicated than battlefield tactics. The attack came during lunch period when the cafeteria was packed and guards were spread thin. Tank had chosen his moment perfectly. It started with the milkshake. Jake was halfway through his meal when the cold liquid splashed across his back. Vanilla shake soaked through his jumpsuit, dripping onto the floor. The cafeteria erupted in laughter as Tank's crew celebrated. He didn't flinch. Years of discipline had taught him patience. He just stared at the white puddle dripping from his sleeve, then slowly lifted his eyes. "Look at that," Tank boomed. "Old man so scared he can't even turn around." Jake slowly wiped shake from his hands with a napkin, his movements deliberate. He could hear Tank approaching from behind heavy footsteps, shuffling followers. The entire cafeteria held its breath. "I said turn around when I'm talking to you," Tank snarled, grabbing Jake's shoulder and spinning him forcefully. That's when Jake moved. What happened next unfolded with speed and precision that left witnesses struggling to process it. Jake's hand shot upward, fingers finding the exact pressure point on Tank's wrist. The grip released involuntarily. Tank's confident expression shifted to confusion. Before Tank could react, Jake was on his feet. His elbow drove into Tank's solar plexus with surgical accuracy, targeting the nerve cluster that disrupted breathing. Tank doubled over, gasping, his face turning purple. The first crew member rushed forward, swinging a sock filled with batteries at Jake's head, but Jake wasn't there. He'd slipped inside the attacker's reach, his palms striking upward and sending the man sprawling backward into a collapsing table. Two more attackers came from different directions. Jake moved between them like smoke. A knee strike dropped one. A precise chokehold rendered the other unconscious in 3 seconds. The cafeteria erupted into chaos. Inmates scrambled for exits. Guards rushed in with riot gear clattering. But when the dust settled, only one man was standing. Jake stood in the center of the destruction, breathing slightly elevated but otherwise composed. Around him lay Tank and 4 enforcers, groaning or unconscious. The milkshake that started it all was now mixed with blood on the concrete floor. Tank struggled to his knees, his face a mask of pain and disbelief. "What are you?" he wheezed. Jake looked down at the fallen king with something that might have been pity. "I'm someone who just wanted to eat his lunch in peace. But I'm also someone who learned a long time ago that respect isn't given, it's earned." Guards surrounded him with weapons drawn. Jake raised his hands slowly, submitting without resistance. He'd sent the message he needed to send. Word spread through Blackwater like wildfire. The gray-haired newcomer had destroyed Tank Rodriguez in less than 30 seconds. By evening count, every inmate knew the truth. Jake Morrison wasn't what he appeared. But victory came with a price. Jake sat in solitary confinement, understanding he'd crossed a line from which there was no return. He was no longer just another inmate. He'd become a legend. And legends attracted dangerous attention. Warden Patricia Hayes visited on the 3rd day, flanked by guards. She'd run Blackwater for 12 years and had seen every type of inmate. But Jake represented something new. "Mr. Morrison," she said, settling into the chair, "we need to talk. According to your file, you're here for financial crimes. Nothing that would suggest you're capable of what happened in that cafeteria." Jake closed his book. "People aren't always what they appear to be, ma'am." The warden leaned forward. "I've been running this facility for over a decade. I've seen riots, gang wars, murders, but I've never seen anything like what you did to those men. 2 are still unconscious. That level of skill doesn't come from weekend self-defense classes." Silence stretched between them. This was a decision point that would determine his remaining sentence. "I served my country for 23 years, Jake said finally. "Some of that service required specialized training, but I never wanted to use those skills here. I came to do my time quietly." The warden nodded slowly. "Your military records are sealed at a level requiring federal clearance. That tells me everything. The question now is what we do about the situation you've created." "I didn't create anything," Jake replied. "I responded to threats." Warden Hayes stood and walked to the window. "What you don't understand is that your actions upset a balance that took years to establish. Tank wasn't just a bully. He was a pressure valve that kept this place from exploding. Now we have a power vacuum, and every ambitious sociopath sees an opportunity." She turned back to face him. "Unless we find someone to fill that vacuum, someone with both respect and wisdom to prevent bloodshed." Jake understood immediately. "You want me to become the new king. I want you to consider the alternative. Without leadership, this place tears itself apart. Good men like your cellmate Danny get caught in crossfire. Guards get hurt. We'll have to lock down the entire facility for months." The conversation was interrupted by urgent footsteps. A guard appeared. "Ma'am, situation in cell block B. 3 gangs mobilizing. Looks like they're preparing to claim Rodriguez's territory." The warden sighed. "How long?" "Maybe an hour." Jake stood slowly. "Ma'am, there might be another way. Let me talk to them." "Absolutely not," the guard interjected. "That would be suicide." Jake's voice carried quiet authority. "I've walked into hostile situations before. Sometimes the best way to prevent war is to show up unarmed and start talking." Warden Hayes studied his face, weighing dangerous options. Against my better judgment, I'm giving you a chance, but guards stay nearby. First sign of violence, we extract you. Understood? Understood. 20 minutes later, Jake walked into Cell Block B's main corridor. 3 gang factions had taken strategic positions. Aryan Brotherhood at the north end, Mexican Mafia in the center, black gangs unified in the south. All armed with improvised weapons, radiating focused aggression. All 3 groups went silent when Jake appeared. "Gentlemen," Jake said calmly, "I understand there's confusion about territorial arrangements. I thought we might talk before anyone does something they can't take back." The Aryan leader, massive, tattooed Kruger, stepped forward with a crude knife. "You got balls coming here, old man. But balls don't stop steel." Jake faced him directly. "I came to prevent a war that'll hurt everyone. But if you'd rather settle with violence, I'm prepared for that too." The quiet confidence made even Kruger hesitate. "The Navy SEAL thinks he can dictate terms," said Alpha, the Mexican Mafia leader, his voice measured. Jake nodded respectfully. "You're right. I have no authority, no crew, no territory. I'm just someone who's seen what happens when good men get caught in wars they didn't start." Marcus Washington, the black gang leader, laughed without humor. "You took out Tank. Now you think you can play peacemaker. This is about power, territory, respect, going back years." Jake understood he was walking a tightrope. "You're right. But it's also about what happens if you tear this place apart, fighting over scraps." Tank kept brutal peace, but it was still peace. Without that, everyone suffers. Guards crack down harder, privileges suspended, visits canceled. The 3 leaders exchanged calculating glances. "What are you proposing?" Elf asked carefully. "Divide Tank's territory between the 3 of you through negotiation, not warfare. Each crew gets something. Nobody watches their back every second. Administration doesn't crack down on everyone." Kruger spat. "What makes you think we need your permission?" "Because you've seen what I can do when forced," Jake replied quietly. "And because war means everyone loses, except the people who run this place." Silence stretched. Finally, Marcus stepped forward. "You make sense, old man, but respect isn't something you talk into. If you want to broker peace, show us you can handle responsibility." "What do you have in mind?" "Someone stealing from commissary deliveries, money missing, supplies diverted. Tank was supposed to handle it. You want to play peacemaker? Prove you can deliver justice." The challenge was clear. Jake was being tested. "I'll look into it," Jake said, "but I need something in return. No moves against each other until I've sorted this out, and when I find who's stealing, you accept my judgment." The 3 leaders exchanged glances. Finally, Elf nodded. 1 week, 7 days to prove yourself. You fail or play favorites, the deal's off. "Agreed," Jake replied, knowing he'd accepted a burden that could easily kill him. But as he walked back under watchful eyes, he also knew he'd potentially prevented a bloodbath. Over the next week, Jake applied his military training to the commissary theft. He studied supply chains, interviewed workers, tracked patterns. He discovered that a trustee named Tommy Chen had been skimming high-value items to pay off gambling debts to outside connections. When confronted, Tommy broke down. Jake negotiated a solution. Tommy would work off the debt through extra duties, and the 3 gangs would receive compensation from Tommy's commissary privileges. Justice without bloodshed. Peace through wisdom. By the end of his investigation, Jake had earned something more valuable than fear: respect. The 3 gang leaders acknowledged him as a neutral arbiter. Violence in Cell Block dropped 40%. The warden quietly expanded his privileges. Jake Morrison hadn't wanted to be a leader. He'd wanted to serve his time quietly. But sometimes, circumstances demand more than we plan to give. And sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks like he doesn't belong there until the moment he proves exactly why he does. Thank you for reading this powerful story from Behind Bars Tales. If Jake's journey from victim to respected leader moved you, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to understand that true strength isn't about violence, it's about wisdom, discipline, and knowing when to fight and when to talk. Subscribe now for more incredible true stories from inside America's prisons, because sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. And sometimes the best way to win a war is to prevent it from starting.